Welcome to the Bob Priest Show of Life podcast. I'm your host, Bob Priest. Thanks for tuning in today's show. This podcast is dedicated to individuals and professionals who desire to learn more about the subject of health and wellness, as well as alternative technologies to better health and vitality. Let's get started. Good morning and welcome to the Bob Priest Show of Life podcast. I'm your host, Bob Priest. Thank you for joining us today. My guest today is Dr. Kim Grom. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're sure glad to have you. Dr. Kim is an ordained minister and motivational faith-based speaker and writer, helps change people's lives through perspective shifts towards healing. As a licensed temperament therapist with a master's in divinity and a Ph.D. in pastoral counseling, Dr. Kim has a solid foundation that she's used to create an evangelistic outreach for youth called Revelation Generation, with over 35,000 in attendance. Wow. Dr. Kim has furthered her mission through operating her nonprofit Life Connections, bookstores, cafe, counseling center with internships for women coming out of faith-based rehab, as well as speaking at retreats, gatherings, and churches. Wow, that's a lot. And there's still more to go. But so welcome. And let's hear more about who Dr. Kim is.
Well, Dr. Kim was born in the humble place of Plainfield, New Jersey, back in the day. And it was interesting because the Lord said to me, "You were born in a plain field." And I said, "Yes, I was." And, it's very interesting because immediately I thought our Lord was born in a stable. But anyway, that's the early beginnings. A little bit about my testimony is I had a healing crisis and a health challenge to overcome as well. And that was the beginning of my journey to seeking the Lord and seeking answers for the condition that I found myself in. That was back in 1989, a long time ago.
Oh, a couple of years back.
Yeah.
So besides that, when did you know that the Lord was calling you into the ministry?
Well, I would say that I became involved watching a very famous televangelist who's since passed away and whose university I attended in Virginia Beach. And at that time, I felt this very strong sense that I was supposed to attend the university there. And when I got to the university, one of the first courses they had you take was spiritual formation. And it was there that they actually asked you to dive into and identify on a personal level why you felt that the Lord had put a call on your life. I would say that there were always inklings along the way in different, areas of life, but that was the time that I knew that I knew that I knew, because I had been challenged to identify it on a personal level.
That's great. And that's an important, my show is about holistic and alternative modalities for health. And, there's some pillars, the body, the mind, and the soul. But I have in my lifetime really depended heavily on my soul and the spiritual life, that walk that I have day in and day out with a higher being than Bob Priest. And so let's talk a little bit more about the soul and the spirit, because we hear that word, and a lot of times I think it's elusive for a lot of people. What is the spirit? What is the soul? What does the soul mean to you?
Well, to me, the way I had learned the definition, the body is the flesh, the soul, from a counseling perspective, is the mind, will, and emotions. And then the spirit man is the part that is lit up, reborn, and connected to the spirit world. And people go in a variety of ways, but my understanding theologically is that when you are born again and you are accepted as a citizen of heaven, which the Bible talks about, then your spirit man becomes alive to heaven and to Christ. And your entire perspective changes, which is what happened to me. You hear a lot of terms. People say, oh, well, what is that? It's just a word. No, it's not just a word. Becoming alive to the Spirit of God and having that dwell in you, as Paul talks about, is amazing. It's one of the most amazing things that I think can ever happen to somebody.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you were talking about having a health challenge back in your life earlier that kind of has perpetuated your ministry and what you practice. How did that spiritual walk help you go through that challenge in life?
Well, I have to say that there was a key person in my life, and she and I figured out that we were destined to live near each other. Interestingly enough, I'd been looking for a home with my husband. We looked in a neighborhood, almost decided on a home. She lived there, hadn't met her yet, didn't decide on that home, decided on another home, found out years later she and I became neighbors, next door neighbors. Her husband suddenly decided they had to move. One way or another, I was going to meet this lovely lady. And one of the things that she challenged me with as I was going through the health crisis was she said, why don't you come to my ladies' Bible study meeting? And I said, nah, I don't know. I've had enough of that growing up. I don't need any more religion. She said, I promise you, I'm from the same denomination you are. This is not that. And then she said this to me, what do you have to lose? And that was the key, because really, I had nothing to lose. And I'm so glad I went, because I met a community of faith-based people. And they were fervent for the Lord, which I had not grown up in a community of fervency. So I had a foundation, which I had walked away from. And that was the beginning of the journey of learning to pray, learning the scriptures. One of the Bible study leaders who I still am connected with, I consider her to be my spiritual mom, is a very anointed woman in the area of prayer and healing and faith, and a pastor's wife, and her husband has since gone on to be with the Lord. That woman was very instrumental in modeling for many of us that were at her Bible study, us ladies, the things of faith, and encouraging us that there was a lot more to it than what we had heard or thought. And it was amazing. It was just an amazing journey at that time.
That's really awesome. And I was thinking about one of the words that you spoke, and you said modeling. And in our culture today, there seems to be a real disconnect in our church and people and the modeling that's going on, especially in the, now that we're post-COVID and post past elections, things like that. But I've noticed even in my church, the young people are hungry. Our youth, the youth of our church, whether it's secondary school or college and or young married couples, they're on fire. And you used the word fervent. I'm seeing that fervency in their life. They're hungry. And prior to that, I kept hearing that we're losing these people. But in my estimation, what I'm seeing is we're really starting to see a hunger. And as an older person, I feel very, very mindful that I better be a good model. If I'm going to say that I'm a Christian, if I'm a spirit-filled man, then my job has got to be about modeling that, or I'm going to fall into this category of failing people that are watching. And I don't want to be in that category. I don't want to go before the pearly gates and the Lord look at me and go, you missed some opportunity there, bud. So let's talk a little bit more about that modeling piece, because I think you hit on something that's very important for us as believers. It doesn't matter about denominations. What matters is about our heart and our relationship with God. Talk about that a little bit more and kind of dive a little deeper into that for us.
Well, we're all made in the image of God. So we have his DNA in us, which many times we're not aware of that, but we are. And yet at the same time, we are being changed from glory to glory. So we don't start out perfect. So, even Jesus in the stories of his disciples failed him on many occasions. Peter denied him, and, Judas betrayed him. So these things do happen. But yet, as you said, Bob, it's important that if we call ourselves what we call ourselves, that we at least put forth the effort, and that can be in many ways. That can be as simple as not falling to whatever the prevalent culture is and putting a guard at your lips so that the Bible says, so no unclean conversation comes out of your lips, because especially the words we speak to one another. And if we're in a context of youth and relationships with youth, you would be surprised that even though they don't act like they're listening and they don't let you know that they're listening, you may hear later down the road, I met this guy, and this happens to my husband a lot, who was the administrative orchestrator behind the concert that we did, and I had the vision and he had the guts to lead the troops, and so it happened, and it was a blessing. But you'll hear them say later, I met this guy, I met this woman, I met this person, and they said da 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 da, things that changed my life.
Mhm.
So yes, it's very important that in our behaviors and in the words we speak, we become aware that we are speaking life and death out of our mouths. Speak life. If you see a young person struggling, if as I had worked with the women coming out of the faith-based rehab, yes, we all struggle. We can all fall down, but getting into the jargon of, oh, well, isn't that a shame? Maybe they should have done this and that. You really don't know what they should have done. And it's
Yeah.
so much better to speak life over a person and give them hope and encouragement, because you may meet them down the road years later and find out that God completely changed them. And that's, of course, what we want. That's what the Lord wants. That's what we want.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's in his timing, right?
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
not ours, it's in his.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I've heard for many years. In fact, I read a book called "Hung by the Tongue," and and talks in James about the tongue and how big of a stumbling block it can be if we're not careful. And I think we as a people in general, we have to be very careful what we speak out of our mouth, because then it goes back up here, and we hear what we speak, and that's kind of who we become if we're not careful. And so the words that we speak are so powerful, and they can be positive or negative. Let's make them positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would you think has been your biggest success to this point in your life, and that has encouraged you the most in your ministry?
Wow, that's a tough one. I would say just working with the women interns that came to the Christian bookstore and cafe was pivotal, because again, I thought, many people think, that how to fix somebody. Well, if they only do these 20 things, and if those 20 things don't work, then if they try these 20 things, oh, surely it'll work. But having sat with the parents of one particular young lady and hearing their story about their daughter who became a heroin addict, it was unfathomable to me how this could have happened, just as it was for them, other than the substance is addictive and somebody got her into it, and that was the end of that. I would say that I learned so much about not judging and sticking with people no matter what, praying for them no matter what. As far as I know, This gal is still on her journey. She hasn't left the planet. She has very kind, loving Christian parents and sister. So that was one thing. And then the second thing, of course, was reaching out to the youth at the Revelation Generation concert at our farm. That was a big splash, but it was a seed sowing ministry. It was evangelical. The idea was that the bands, the likes of Toby Mac and the Newsboys and Chris Tomlin, they were fish hooks. They brought the youth in. And then it didn't matter whether you were a church youth or not. We encouraged all of the churched youth to bring friends, unsaved friends. And the message was going forth in many ways, in music and song. And oh gosh, working with young people, so much energy, so creative. And watching, I would say one of the most lasting memories I have was sometime about the third year of the concert. We only did it for 7 years. Watching the young people come to the leaders and say, we would like to be able to pray in groups after, these bands who we know finish on the fields. Can we have permission to do that? And we said, of course. We knew some of the young people who wanted to do this. We knew they were solid. And just watching them gather each other, that was a very, very powerful thing. And I would say, in terms of success, that the Lord was pleased to see that.
That's really awesome. And I think the key out of that comment was you talked about the fish hook, and just we're fishers of men. So you're casting and you're slowly trolling and pulling it back in. And that's really powerful, because we as a people are laying seeds, and some of those seeds fall in different places. We don't have a clue which ones are going to germinate and really come back up in a very fruitful way. Our job really, I think, is just to put those seeds out there, is just to throw the hook out and continue on, regardless of what we see happening. I was an educator for over 30 years prior to my stroke, and I I got I was one of these people. I read a lot of material. I read a lot of books of positive thoughts, and so I was always in my classes throwing something out to try to encourage kids to change a mindset or whatever. And they started numbering them. Mr. Priest, oh, that's number 32. And I never thought they were really listening, to be honest with you, like you said earlier. And I remember my first job when I was leaving to go back to graduate school, I received this bound document, and it had said on the front of it, Mr. Priest quotes. And they weren't really my quotes. They were a lot of times quotes that I got from different books that I read, but they remembered them, and they had the numbers by them that they used. And I've been in I was a band director, so I've been in a couple of different places. And that's happened in every one of the places I ever taught, because I was always, the words I tried to use were encouraging words and motivational words and all that. And I found that interesting that they actually remembered, because the verbiage would be almost identical. I could remember because I'd done it so much. And it really hit me. It laid on me that they really do listen. And when does it come back to help them? I don't know, but I hope that it does. I hope and pray that someday that something I said in a positive way comes back and brings fruit. And I've seen that. I've been around long enough now that I've seen some of my students go off into the ministry, go off into teaching music, doing other things. And they'll come back and make a comment to me about, I remember when.
Yeah.
So that's so neat. You've had talking about a bookstore and a cafe, and I've noticed that you have some books that you've written yourself. Talk about those a little bit.
Well, I read at an early age, and I love books. I've always loved books. Our home is filled with books. So I guess, like yourself as an educator, sometimes that's just part of who you are and what you love. Having a bookstore for me, I purchased one in my town, in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, many years ago. And it was like having a treasure store. I mean, I enjoyed buying them. We worked with Spring Hill, which is Ingram, to purchase things. And, it was a niche because it was a Christian bookstore. And then we expanded and had a cafe that went along with it. And then I was getting my degree, and upstairs we had counseling. So I had counseling upstairs. It was just a labor of love. But the books I have written, the first one that I felt motivated to write was for my grandchildren, because lo and behold, my oldest son, who had 2 children at the time, my first 2, he went and moved to Tennessee. And here I am in New Jersey, and he was living on the farm. We had a beautiful farm there, and there were farmhouses, and everything was wonderful. I got to see my granddaughter regularly. Ha. Well, he said, Mom, I've been praying. My wife and I have been praying, and we're going to move to Tennessee. We think that we will have a better life there for our children, more community, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay. And, it just pierced my heart because I realized these children were moving. So I wrote a book called Little Blue's Runaway Adventure, and it's about a bird who's a grandma, and she misses her family, and she gets onto she boards a plane, and she hides in the coat closet, and she ends up in Tennessee. So my granddaughter is reading this book with my grandson. He's a little younger at the time, and she gets about halfway through. She puts it down and she says, Grandma. And I said, yes, Audrey. She said, is this about us? And I said, yes, this is about you. And she said, oh, that granny bird really loves her grandbabies, doesn't she? I said, yes, she does. So that was the point of the book, was that, parents love their children. Most parents love their children, but we don't often include grandparents in the fact that, yes, many grandparents really do love their children. And that was the point. And since then, I've written a devotional called The Promise Within the Garden for Women. And I'm working on another devotional right now called Reflections of Grace. So I love a devotional because it's something you can keep on your nightstand, something that will point you to scripture, not necessarily a deep study, but, there may be times and days where you just need a little encouragement, or you just skip the time to really dive in, but yet you don't want to miss the time to be in God's word. So that's why I love the devotionals.
That is so cool. How could our listeners, especially other grandparents that maybe want to read the book that you wrote for your grandchildren, how could they get a hold of that book? What's a good place for them to look?
Oh, I have a website. It's drkimgrom.org. And there are links there to all the books. And they can be found on Amazon. They can be found at Barnes and Nobles. The devotional can be found at Ingram Publishers. But the easiest way, I think, is if you just went to my website, drkimgrom.org, and you can find all the links there.
That's awesome. That I got my teared up just a little bit when you were doing that. And I'm not a grandparent yet, but I have adopted a lot of kids in my life, in my heart, especially the church kids, younger kids at church that have had children. We seem to have this big explosion in our church right now of babies. And so I'm one of those that just gravitates to them. I guess it's being around kids all my life because I just loved the enthusiasm of kids, and then seeing them grow up. So that just warmed my heart. And I noticed you had another one called Little Blue and the Kingdom in the Clouds.
Oh, yes. My husband and I served with our pastor, Craig Lauterbach, up at the River of Life Church in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And the experience that the pastor and my husband and I shared was the loss of a child. And so Pastor Craig, who we've known for, oh my, going on 20 years at least, he started a grief share program at his church, he and his wife. And then after 3 years of serving that way, he said, Kim and Bob, I think that Cindy and I would like you and your husband to facilitate this group. Would you be interested? And we prayed about it and said, sure, we would. So grief share is meant for adults mainly. Kids can come, but it is pretty much adult based. And I thought, I'm going to write a book about little Blue who loses her mama, and how she reconciles faith and the fact that there is the Lord Jesus, and the kingdom in the clouds, which is heaven. So that is the basis for that. It came out of our time that we spent serving at Grief Share, and the desire to have something that young ones could wrap their brains around without getting a little too heavy.
That's good. My myself and my daughter went through the loss of my first wife. She lost her mom when she was just entering into college, and so that was a real trying time, especially from the grief standpoint, because how does a young girl navigate that? And here I am, a guy, and I don't think like a woman, and trying to figure out how to be both parents. It was a trying time, and to find material like this book or others that are out there really do help the soul to heal. And it's a time thing. It takes, everybody's different. Everybody goes through their own processing, but it's nice to have books like that you can look at, hand to your child if you need to, whatever. So great. It's a good resource. And I hope that people that maybe run into that situation can come back and use your book as one of those things to help through grief. Man, we could go so many different places, but what are you presently reading right now that you're just really encouraged about and inspires you?
Well, I have my Rainbow Study Bible, and I am in 2 Samuel. I am just focusing right now on the life of David and the things that he went through. And from the beginning, not quite through it all yet, but I find that very, very inspiring, that shepherd boy became a king. And excuse me,
Sure.
he also was not a perfect man. So the life of David does inspire me. And most recently, let me see if I can find this over here. I just got the new book by Jonathan Cahn, who I love. And I'm just, hang on one second while it's called Josiah Manifesto. And I know Jonathan Cahn, being a Messianic Jew, he's going to have something very interesting to say in his book. I'm excited to read it. I haven't gotten into it yet. So my husband and I are traveling to Israel this fall, so I'm just encouraged about that as well.
That's cool. My uncle had been a chaplain in the service, and he came out of the Assemblies of God denomination. And in his latter years, when he moved out to New Mexico, he became involved in the Messianic Jewish community. And as my uncle would come back and visit me and my mother back here in Virginia, I remember one day driving down the road and I hear this mumbling in the background. He was sitting in the back seat, and I said, "Uncle Albert, what are you doing?" And he says, "I'm praying." And I said, "Well, I didn't understand anything you were saying." And he goes, "That's because I'm speaking in Hebrew."
Wow.
And I'm like, this man always amazed me. He was so far up ahead of his time. And I said, "Talk to me about that." So he started telling me about the process that he went through. He met a rabbi, asked if he could be taught under him, and he was working within this Messianic Jewish community in New Mexico. And he learned to speak Hebrew fluently.
It
And
is not an easy language.
it's not. And
No.
he visited with me, and we took him to church. And the pastor we were at the end of the service, and the pastor said, "Bob, would you lead us in the closing prayer today?" And I said, "Do you mind if I allow my uncle to do that?" And he said, "Sure." So the first words out of my uncle's mouth were in Hebrew. And you're sitting there going, I have no clue what he's saying, but for some reason it's permeating my spirit. And then after he finished whatever he was saying in Hebrew, then he said the interpretation in English. And it was so eloquent of a prayer. It just puts chills on my body right now as I think about it. But I've always wanted to learn that language, but I gave up way too soon.
Oh, I did as well. I had a smattering of it at Regent for the Masters in Divinity, and I thought, oh my goodness, it's like Chinese with the figures and the pictures and the sounds, and yet I know when we go visit there, I'll be hearing a lot of it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very eloquent language, in my opinion, and there's something powerful behind it, I guess. But it's been encouraging to have you on this morning. You have done a lot in your young life, and it's amazing what, once somebody finds their calling, finds their purpose, they allow their body, mind, and spirit to help lead them through this calling. What things can happen? I mean, you couldn't have possibly visioned what it would look like today back when this all started, could you?
Oh, no, absolutely not. But, the Lord, he speaks to his people. He talks to us in so many ways. And if you're listening, he will, in all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. And he does. And so you have different seasons in your life. And as long
Mhm.
as you're following and listening and you love God and love people to the best of your ability, that's all. He doesn't require much more than that.
Yeah, I think we make it way too complicated, don't we?
Yes.
If we just listen and follow, uh, we will go down the right path. We have to have discernment and
Mm.
wisdom to know that we need to listen and
Yes.
follow.
Yes. And then, every now and again, the shepherd's rod will come and correct you. And
Right. Well, we all have to have that, don't we?
right, we do.
We are stubborn humans,
And we're sheep. Yes.
and we're sheep. That's for sure. Nobody wants to hear that, but the truth is. I always like to ask my guests to leave two pieces of value for our listening audience. So just give you a brief moment to think about that. Um, what are a couple pieces of encouragement or value that you would like to tell us as we depart today?
Well, I would like to say that wherever you're at in your spiritual journey, don't give up on God. He's real, he's there, he cares. And, if you're willing to do that, then just keep pressing in. I know that times are tough. I know we go through many, many trials in life, but he's there. And take comfort in knowing that he is there. He loves us. And don't quit. Don't give up. Don't quit.
Don't quit. Powerful words, because it's real easy to do that, isn't
Oh, yeah.
it? um,
Maybe 2 days out of the week, I want to quit.
yeah, I always used to say, as long as my wife didn't quit the same day I did,
Right.
we always had somebody to encourage the other one to get through that day. And I really appreciate your words of encouragement and motivation. I think in our world today, there's so much focus on the negative that we tend not to think in the positive. It's like the glass half full or half empty. Um, and we need to be changing our mindset, don't we? To
Oh, yeah.
looking forward, looking positively, speaking powerful words out of our mouth that are encouraging, and not focusing on anything that would do the opposite.
Yes.
Would that be a good way to part today?
Sure. Yes, yes, yes. Because you mentioned your book that your students did, and the word that came to me was that we have treasure in earthen vessels, and we are made of dust. But you had a treasure in your heart, and we all have treasures in our heart, and it's very important to not lose sight of that. That he allows us to uh, pull treasures up out of us, as we walk with him. And I love the fact that you have your own treasure book now of Bob Priest. I think that's really fantastic.
That's so neat. And thank you for saying that. So, on that, I think we'll wrap this up today. Dr.
Yeah.
Kim, thank you so much for being a guest with me today and for speaking some words of encouragement that are uplifting and encouraging to our audience and people around the world today. Um, to learn more about me and my mission to educate the public about integrative medicine and other alternative healing modalities, which I think the spiritual side of that is very, very important, go to bobpriest.life, BOBPRIEST.life. And while there, read a blog or two, and then check out my podcast, The Bob Priest Show of Life, and watch this show every week on Friday at 9 a.m. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you on the flip side of next week. Have a great day. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks again for checking into today's episode. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, Apple, leave me a 5-star rating if you so choose, and if you enjoyed the show. I'm so grateful that you're spending some time with us and listening to our podcast. If you need to get in touch with me to learn more about my passion to inform and educate about alternative methods and modalities of healing, you can go to www.bobpriest.life. That's BOBPRIEST.life. While there, check out a blog or two and listen to other podcast sessions that I've had in the past. Guys, have a great day, and thank you so much for joining in.